very interesting. It's been very interesting as a therapist to have the same problems as all my clients at the same time. I mean, typically my problems are usually a little different than my clients. I mean, sometimes a therapist is in the process of a divorce and they might have a client that's in the process of a divorce. But to talk with people every day about fear and stress and anxiety and going crazy with their kids at home and all that kind of stuff, it's like, yeah, we all have the same problems every day. And weren't we so cute back in March of 2020 saying, oh my God, I can't wait till this is over by summer. Wouldn't this have been terrible if this had happened in October and we had to go through a whole winter like this? We were such fools back then. But we also used to wash our potato chip bags. That's really how foolish we were back then when you don't know a lot about something as stressful as a global pandemic. But I do want to say that I love presenting because I love being in rooms with people, and I like participation. And so for all of you who have your cameras on, thank you. For those of you who don't, it's fine. But it is hard sometimes to just talk to a black box, as we probably all know on some level. But I want to talk about sort of no one's doing that great. Everyone's a little tattered and torn through their jobs, through their relationships, through healthcare. It's just been a really exhausting time. And because it's lasted so long, we've actually all gotten a little weirder, than we used to be. I mean, we were all weird to begin with, but now we have different kinds. Like I don't wipe my eyes anymore. I use my wrist, and I still do, and sort of like, okay, what strange thing did I develop there? Or, all the judgments I make about people who wear chinderwear, as I call it, because I don't know what this is, like just a hammock for my very heavy chin or something. And I think of people driving in the winter alone in their cars with a mask on. And I say, what are they doing? And I see people walking on the bike path in Burlington alone with no one else on the bike path, and they have a mask on. And so we are a little tattered and torn by this thing called COVID. And it has affected sort of how we self-regulate as a species. Because as a species, we are very, very social. Even introverts haven't done well. At the beginning of COVID, they sort of said, oh my God, this is great. The whole world knows what my world's like. I love being home. I love working remotely. I love it. Well, yeah, do that for 6, 7, 8 months. And they're like, I hate this. You can't go anywhere. You can't do anything. You can't see anybody. Because even introverts are social. They just have slightly less social need than an extrovert might. But it's just been incredibly difficult. And the fact that 2020, for a lot of us, it was living with a lot of fear and uncertainty. And our usual ways as human beings of coping with things like fear and uncertainty are things like getting together with friends, going to the movies, having a beer with a colleague on Friday before you go home and face your screaming kids, go on vacation. Some people actually like to go shopping as a way to relax. Who wants to shop during a pandemic? Nothing was open. And then if you did shop, you shopped primarily for toilet paper, because that seemed to be front and center of everybody's mind, is what's going on with the toilet paper. I still think, that Kimberly-Clark and all those other toilet paper companies, I still think they don't have any idea sort of what was going on with the toilet paper. But there was something going on. Actually, I have a theory about it I'll share with you later. So it's the enduring quality has sort of kind of made us all a little more fragile, a little more emotional, and a little more numb in a lot of ways. So the 3 things I want to talk the most about today are stress and anxiety and languishing. But let's first start with stress. So stress is the physical and mental response to something that feels sort of threatening. So all living creatures experience stress. When you walk on the grass, each blade of grass is stressed out by your weight on it. Our bodies are stressed all the time because gravity would say that we should be horizontal, but we chose to be vertical, which means there's strain on our backs all day long. So the idea, people come to therapy because they say, I just don't want so much stress in my life. I'm like, yeah, that's not going to happen because all living creatures are stressed. But I want to differentiate between stress. When most people talk about stress, they're usually talking about distress. So if we think of at the top, stress is just a part of being a living creature. And then how we respond to stress determines whether it's distress or eustress, E-U-S-T-R-E-S-S. I don't know if that's a word familiar with people. Because most of the time when we talk about being stressed out, we usually talk about being distressed out. The negative effects of stress. But there are actually positive effects of stress. Like having to do a big presentation and you're feeling very stressed about it. That can also be very motivating. You might sort of work on it every day for 2 weeks. You might practice. You might practice in front of a friend just so that you sort of stop tripping over certain words, and you want to make sure that, you can do the PowerPoint, and that's all stress, but that has a positive outcome at the end. Distress is sort of we all know what distress is. It's the miserable kind of stress. Roller coasters. I love roller coasters. I look at them and I think it's going to be so fun, I'm going to die. It's going to be so fun, I'm going to die. It's going to be so fun, I'm going to die. And I haven't died, if you haven't noticed. And only one of them wasn't very fun. One of them I actually wanted to get off. But you kind of can't do that once you start. You're on it. Which is kind of like a pandemic. Once you're on it, you can't get off. There's no country to go to where there's no pandemic. So we're just caught in stress as a species. And I'm going to, Christy, can you share the screen? Make me a co-host. So I can share screen. Here we go. All right.
Sorry, I'm talking and I'm muted. You should be all set now.
Yeah, I am.
Perfect.
So I've been working on this little thing for the last couple years. Again, because so many people's issues sort of feel very common, including my own. So animals, humans included, like a fair amount of predictability. If any of you have dogs, if 6 or 7 times a day you moved the dog's food and the dog's water bottle to different places in the house and not together, your dog would get really stressed. He would feel really anxious. That's what happens. When the world is less predictable, to humans, we'll say, they get more anxious. When they get more anxious, they get this twisted idea that if I could just get more control over things, I will be able to make my life more predictable and therefore decrease my anxiety. And we all know, and some of us have been control freaks at times. And control freaks are just anxious people who want more predictability in their lives. That's all that is. So they might look like they're jerks. They might seem like they're insensitive and they're steamrollers, and you see them at meetings and stuff where they're no, we're not going to do that. We're not, and it's just sort of like, oh my God, so much control. It's like control is just a desire for more predictability to decrease the anxiety. So here's where it continues on. We tend to want to control things that aren't in our control, like other people. And you can't really control other people. You can't even get a baby in a high chair to open its mouth if it doesn't want to. You can do the Zoom and the airplane, and if I don't want that, I'm not budging. So we learn pretty early that you can't make people do things, but somehow we have this erroneous belief that in order to get less anxious, I'll take more control. And the more control we desire, I got to move this out of the way. The more control we desire, the more expectations we have, because we also have another belief that if I could control more things, I can expect them to go better. And the Buddha said, all suffering comes from wants, which was just his way of saying the more expectations you have in the world, the more disappointed you're going to be. So the more expectations we develop, the more opportunities we have for disappointment. And the more disappointment we have, the world starts feeling less and less predictable. And we get more anxious and we seek more control. And we go round and round and round and round. And that's a whole planet of people doing this. So it's amazing we're all kind of functional, In fact, Christy, we're more functional today than your laptop was. Go figure that. All right, I'm going to stop the share. So eustress and distress. How do we know, how can we tell the difference? And then what do we do when we're phenomenally exhausted? Because then even small things stress us out. Like getting home from the grocery store and realizing that they didn't put 2 things into any of your bags. And it's like, oh my God, do I really have to go back? It's like all that stuff just seems heavier and heavier in the pandemic. I got to close something here. All right, now the body has natural ways. The body has its own pharmacy of drugs to help us deal with stress. They're called neurotransmitters. People have heard of dopamine. It's where the word dope comes from, and so that's the pleasure chemical. Endorphins, like a runner's high. I live quite close to mile 22 of the Burlington Marathon. And when I see the runners at mile 13, they look pretty beat. And at 22, they're like waving to the people watching, saying, thank you for coming out. You guys are awesome. And I'm thinking they are as high as a kite, because there's no way at mile 22 you're waving to people and talking. So that's what endorphins do. Serotonin, some people have heard of. That's sort of the mood stabilizer neurotransmitter. That's the drug that kind of helps us not want to jump off a bridge every day, because there's good reasons probably most days to jump off a bridge. Adrenaline is the fight or flight. You hear those stories of, car runs over a kid and some 5'2" mother lifts up the car to get the kid. It's like, yeah, what is that? It's like, that's adrenaline. And then there's Nori Epinephrine, which if you like medical shows, they wheel somebody into the ER with like a pipe sticking out of their stomach, and the person's like, get it out, get it out, get it out. And you sort of think like, I don't know if I'd be talking. I think I'd be kind of like in shock. And the reason you're sort of not in shock, is norepinephrine. So that's why they'll say things like, 500 cc's of nori, because that sort of makes you sort of not very connected to your body. Because otherwise it would not feel very good to have a pipe sticking out of your stomach. Well, maybe some people would like it, but I think most of us wouldn't like it. So this idea of needing to make friends with stress and being able to recognize that the body is equipped to fight stress, and how we differentiate between stress that isn't necessarily bad for us versus stress that's pretty exhausting, because the exhausting stress will affect our energy levels, and our energy levels will affect our ability to respond differently to stress. All right, any questions on stress? I know that there's a lot more to the world of stress, but that's sort of like a little encapsulated version. No questions. Okay, so now I want to talk about anxiety. So anxiety is triggered by stress. And I don't actually think of anxiety as a feeling. I think of it as a thought. Because my other feelings, like sad and scared and mad, if someone runs over my dog, I don't go, I wonder what feeling I want to have. I'm just going to be wicked upset. But I actually decide which things I get anxious about and which things I don't. And that's why to me it doesn't feel like it's like a regular feeling. I think it's something that happens more here than here, if actually feelings live here in my shirt. Um, but anxiety is designed to keep us alive. So see on my ceiling, that's fire and smoke detector, which is very, very, very loud. That is what anxiety is. It's an alarm system meant to warn you about danger. Now, if you go to the Cape and you go to the beach and you got the kids and all your crap with you, and there's a sign that says sharks were seen in the water today, and you notice that no one's in the water, everyone's just playing on the beach, and your kids say, can we go in? You say no. And why do you say no? Because it makes you anxious. That sign is an alarm that went off saying, not good day to feed my children to the great white sharks. People who don't have enough anxiety get eaten by sharks and get run over by cars because they just cross the street without looking. Usually they're texting. And, they're the people that get run over. The reason most of us probably don't text all the time when we cross the street is because it's probably going to hurt if a car or a bus hits you. So anxiety is meant to help. Some people are blessed with extra anxiety, meaning they have very sensitive alarm systems. I remember once being at somebody's house where I was taking a shower and the smoke detector went off with the steam from the shower. And I'm thinking, well, first of all, like steam's not even smoke. Like it's water. Like how would water set that off? And the person whose house I was at said, oh, yeah, it's a really sensitive smoke alarm. I'm like, yeah. Well, that's what some people's alarm systems are like. But if you think about what we've been through in the last 2 years, like washing potato chip bags, leaving your mail outside for 3 days so that COVID can dry up on it before you bring it in and open it. For that whole year of 2020, I worked with a couple. Neither of them had left their house, like just even gone on the front porch the whole year. They had groceries delivered, they had everything delivered. And I said, you can go out and like walk around the block. And get this, talk about anxiety. What if we're walking around the block and someone is also out for a walk and they have a heart attack or something and I am compelled to help them and get COVID? It's like, wow, that is one alarm system. That is a very, very sensitive alarm system. So all our alarm systems got amplified. If every human is anxious, COVID just sort of made us all a bit more anxious. And so the job when anxiety is present is we have to determine if it's real danger, like the German Shepherd running really fast at you, and it's not yours, or imagined danger. What if we have another year that was as bad as this year at work and I lose my job? Okay, but that's not happening. So if your brain is a decision-making, problem-solving machine, it's going to have a very hard time helping you solve a problem when there isn't one. It's just one you made up. So you have to determine if it's a real or imagined danger. And then you also have to figure out if it's a real danger, is it small, medium, or large? Like really, what are we doing? And that threat assessment has to be done in the prefrontal cortex, not the amygdala. The amygdala is about the size of an almond. If you were drilled straight through here and straight through here, it's kind of right at the middle, just below the hippocampus. And that's the feeling center of the brain. And then this front part is the thinking part of the brain. But when the alarm system goes off, we tend to immediately go to our amygdala, not to our prefrontal cortex. So sometimes when that alarm goes off, when they're testing them in the building that I work in, a client will look at the alarm, look at me, look at the alarm, look at me, and they'll be, do we have to go? And I'll say, no, they're testing the alarms today. How do you know? What if it's a fire on the day they're testing the alarms? I'm like, well, I would know that because the fire department is like a block away, and so the fire trucks would already be here if it was a real alarm. But see, there's a man in the basement testing it, and so he calls the fire department and says, okay, I'm going to test right now. Okay, test is over. Okay, yep, thank you. Which means they don't leave the firehouse. And then they can calm down a little bit. So it's designed to get your attention. So don't dismiss, just like we can't avoid stress, because it's just part of every living creature's day-to-day existence. You also don't want to get rid of anxiety. Can you believe a therapist is actually telling you that? Don't tell anybody else. This is just between us. But to think about, how do I regulate anxiety? Is it real or is it imagined? Imagined often is in the future. Can't really do, you can do some things about the future. You know, I know we're almost out of peanut butter. I should stop and pick up some. There's some things we can do to manage anxiety of making lunches for tomorrow. But a lot of the stuff that we get anxious about isn't really ever going to happen. And so if that alarm went off all day, every day in here, I would have a very hard time concentrating. And I'd have a very hard time having my sessions with clients because I would be distracted by it, and I assume they would be distracted by it too. And that's what's been going on for those of us who had normal amounts of anxiety and those of us who are blessed with extra. We've just had that alarm system going on an awful lot. You know, remember like a year or so ago, if you heard someone got COVID, you sort of had that secret thought like, oh, I wonder what they're doing. They're doing something they're not supposed to be doing. You know, like the world felt scary. You know, now people sort of say, oh, I wish I had it already. Lucky you, get it over with. But it's just been really, really hard. And so we develop symptoms when we have too much anxiety. And those symptoms can be things like not sleeping as well, drinking too much, biting your nails, road rage, rampant fears, you know, just like fears all over the place. And I think all of those things lead to this word languishing. It's an interesting word. It's existed for a long time, but it's just sort of been used in the last year to sort of help us think about kind of the impact that the pandemic has had. Because it's kind of like depression, but it's not really depression. And it's kind of like anxiety, but it's not really completely like anxiety. So it's not like a panic attack anxiety. And it's not like so depressed I lay in bed, you know, crying, you know, and thinking about suicide. But it's got lots of flavor like depression and anxiety. And I think a good definition for languishing would be the absence of well-being. It's sort of a meh-colored space in between depression and flourishing. And it's probably as big an epidemic as COVID has been. Because you put humans to a test for this long, they're going to get meh. Like, you know, like, do I wanna? I don't really feel like it. It has really sort of been hard. So if you think of, well, COVID likes to snack on our motivation to do things, you know, makes it just harder to get activated. Languishing kind of nibbles away at our desire to do things that we like to do, and even takes bigger bites away from the things that we know would be good for us to do. So if you're wondering sort of like, I don't seem as fun as I used to be, or I just get irritated a lot, or, you know, I think I just would rather watch television, you know. I'm so happy the Olympics is on right now, like something else to watch other than Billions and Succession and Ozark. You know, I don't know why I want to watch terrible people all the time, but I do. Probably because it's interesting in a pandemic to watch terrible people. But that's what languishing is like. It's like, you know, I could go for a walk, or I could have a beer. I could go to bed, or I could watch another episode. You know, I could wear pants today, or maybe I'll just keep my pajamas on. I did dress every day during COVID. I will say that, except not shoes, often slippers. So while I tell you anxiety is good for you, you just got to keep an eye on it and do some good threat assessment with your prefrontal cortex. And I tell you that stress is here to stay forever. I don't say the same thing about languishing. Languishing is just really, really hard. It makes small things challenging. It makes good things for us. So I'm not going to spend any time talking to you about, things to do for good self-care. It's like, come on, we all know it's the same list. Get more rest, exercise, eat well, watch your alcohol consumption, do yoga, mindfulness, meditation. It's like, no, we can't self-care our way out of this. Like, this has just been straight up hard. And so it's sort of like trying to keep our heads above languishing, even though we're probably treading water on a lot of days. But we all know, I'm not going to make anyone confess because I'm not a priest. We all know the things that we do that aren't good for us. And we know the things that would probably be better for us to do. And I don't think we're not doing them because we're lazy. I don't believe that for a minute. Or we're not motivated, or we don't care. I don't think it's any of that. I think it's this kind of languishing stuff. Just makes everything kind of seem, for those of you who are old enough, makes it seem like kind of watching black and white TV again. It's like, shows are better in color, with surround sound, versus black and white on a little screen. Although, isn't it funny, we spend all our time now on these little screens, or at least I do. All right, so questions: stress, anxiety, languishing. I'm talking so much I have to have a sip of tea. And yes, the cup is big. It's not an optical illusion.
There's nothing in the chat, but if anyone wants to unmute and make comment, ask questions, please feel free to.
Yeah, or that little reaction box at the bottom, you can kind of raise your hand like I just did. And if I can't see it.
Hey, Kevin, I'll tell you that there's a caveat that you see me going on the road and I'm wearing a mask and no one else is in the car. I actually have a kid in the back seat. That's how I justify my mask wherever I go.
And I can't see the kid?
Right, and I always mouth that to those give me those looks, those hairy eyeballs. Like, why has he got his mask on when no one's in the car? Because the kid in the back seat. That's the kid in the back seat.
But I think, but thank you for saying that. But that's a really good point. I mean, this is, we talk about alarm systems going off. The whole toilet paper thing was anxiety. Like, people started seeing less toilet paper on the shelves, so they started buying more toilet paper. I'm going to buy 6 packages. And then you're at the register buying your mac and cheese, and you see the person in front of you has 6 toilet papers, so then you decide you should probably go get 6 toilet papers too. And that's what anxiety looks like. I'll give you a great example. So I used to go during, at least in 2020, every day when I finished work, I would go to the grocery store, to Hannaford's, even if it was just to buy an avocado, because I just had to see legs. Like, I got so sick of just shoulders and heads all day long, talking to people all day long about the same things that I'm thinking about. Talk about spending time in your head. And so I would go and I'd see people walking around. Well, one day, and this wasn't even in 2020, this was in 2021, I'm going down an aisle, it was probably the condiment aisle, and there was a section on 2 shelves that was completely empty. And I thought, well, what's normally here? So I go up and I read the thing on the shelf, and it's mayonnaise. Now, I don't even eat mayonnaise because it gives me acid reflux, but I go right from that aisle to customer service and say, what's going on with the mayonnaise? And they said, it's a lot of supply chain and labor shortage. That's all I hear about. That's the excuse for everything now. And I'm like, but mayonnaise? Like, when did the people who used to work in the mayonnaise industry just haven't gone to work anymore? Like, what? And who uses that much mayonnaise? Like just a little on each side of the bread. Like it's not like toilet paper. We use a lot more toilet paper than you do mayonnaise. To tell you like how anxiety works, I was at TJ Maxx, and next door is a Shaw's, and so I went into Shaw's specifically to see if they had mayonnaise. And I don't eat mayonnaise. And they did have mayonnaise. So when I went back to Hannaford's a week later, I said, other stores have mayonnaise. And it's like, Kevin, like, what is wrong with you? Like, this is crazy. This is crazy. That's what it's like when your alarm system's going off a lot. It's like the rabbit holes that I go down are just unbelievable, And so, not only can you watch those things and take some delight in them, but you can also watch them and recognize this is how worn out humans are these days. We're all a little more tired than we used to be. Languishing really kills resilience, that ability to bounce back. And so our lives have gotten smaller in a lot of ways, much smaller. Some people's lives have gotten incredibly small. I talked to a couple, this was after vaccines. Was it after the vaccine? Yeah, after the vaccines were out, but before Delta or Omicron or one of those. And they went down to Massachusetts to see the wife's parents, which they hadn't seen in a year and a half. And kids were so excited to go, and they were excited to go. So when I saw the couple the following week, I said, so how was the big trip to Mass? And the husband said, oh, it was like exhausting. He's like I couldn't wait on Sunday to get in the car and come home. And I thought, well, maybe he's just saying that because it's his in-laws. And the wife said, I know, I felt the same way. And I said, well, I said, it wasn't a good time? No, it was perfectly fine. They loved seeing the kids. It was really good to see them. They're both doing really well. But, you have to talk. You have to, be with them. It was exhausting. A whole day. They went on Saturday, and they came home Sunday morning. They're a whole day I had to be, on. And so you realize, we have lost a lot of muscle mass during COVID, social muscle mass. Well, the other muscle mass too, but social muscle mass. We're just not as good at it. People have said, oh yeah, I went to a neighbor's for dinner. It's so nice to be able to do that again. But yeah, I don't really have anything to say. It's just what do we talk about? Did you get a booster? When's your company going back in the office? There's nothing, Do you have any mayonnaise at your house? This is how tiny our lives have gotten. So when you wonder why I don't seem to get up and want to do much these days, it's yeah, there's some good reasons, and none of them fall under that you're lazy or you don't know what's good for you. Yeah. I wish I had brought a picture of it in. Speaking of things that aren't good for you. So popcorn's a good snack, right? Well, at the Christmas tree shop, they had a bag of popcorn. Honest to God, it's 4 feet tall. And I'm now on my second bag. Yeah. I used to eat popcorn less when I had to make it. Now that I just have to open the bag and stick a bowl in and scoop it out, just like dog food. And then just bring it into the TV, the other place I live my life. What? Let's not watch Netflix tonight. Let's watch Prime for something different, or Hulu, or Olympics. Let's watch people fall on ice. Something new and different. So it's been hard. It's been really hard. But I want to talk now because we're almost out of time. Let me look at my clock here. Yeah, we got a little bit of time. So perhaps I've made all this sound very depressing. But, it is kind of depressing. That's the part of languishing that is about depression. That's just been really hard. And I think we all need to kind of pat ourselves on the back that if you're still here and you're still standing and your marriage survived and, your kids can go to school again, that was really hard on families, the kids not going to school. Whew. No, I think jobs and schools were designed so that people had someplace to go every day. Like, we weren't meant to stay home with our loved ones all day long. Like, it's worse than a prison to have to see the same people over and over and over and over again. And it was really hard on the parents that were both working remotely from home while their kids are trying to go to school remotely, and they couldn't help their kids. Like, how does a kindergartner frickin' go to school remotely? And then it was just as stressful for the parents that lost their jobs during COVID and were home with their kids, and we're starting to have beers at 9 o'clock in the morning. It's like, not the kids, or maybe the kids. It's just been very, very hard. So pat yourselves on the back for making it. But it's just gone on too long, which is why you can see sort of this kind of gradual opening up. And I want you all to take full advantage of the idea that I do have to start. So this is my goal for people in 2022 and 2023. This is my second pandemic. My first pandemic was the AIDS pandemic in the early 80s. I was in college. It was just the same. It's fascinating. We had Ronald Reagan as president. So we had another actor in the White House. We had Trump, then we had Reagan, then we had Trump. Didn't believe it was real at all. So put no money or research into it at all. Back then, when people got HIV, they died within a couple of months. So there were like people dying in your dorm. I had my French professor died halfway through a semester of French. We had to get a substitute. And we didn't know, like, do you get it from toilet seats? Do you get it from touching people? Like, where does it come from? And so, it was just as scary. It lasted a bit longer because there's been much more attention on COVID than there was on HIV back then. But after a couple of years, which is where we're at with COVID, is we started talking about safe sex practices. What's a high-risk sexual activity? What's a low risk? Sharing needles is a high-risk activity. Needle exchanges are a lower risk. So we had to figure out some calculation to measure risk, because we just couldn't have a world where no one ever had sex again, because it's probably not ever going to happen, not for animals of any species. And so we had to learn how to measure risk. And I remember a friend of mine who was dying. He had gone back to New York City to be with his parents when he died. And so I was in school in Boston, so I went down to say goodbye to him because I figured it would probably be the last time that I saw him. And I remember standing at the door when I was leaving, and it's like, it feels like the right thing to do is feels like I should hug him because he's dying, and I'm going to miss him. But then I don't know if I should hug him. And so I eventually did. But that's that whole thing that goes on in your head. Can I do this and do it safely? But people are saying sort of like, I'm going to start traveling again. I'm going to start by, going to see my cousin in Pennsylvania, and I'm going to drive. I'm not ready to fly yet, but I think I should go somewhere. It's like, good. But we are going to have to figure out, because the safest thing to do, folks, would be to just isolate for the rest of your life. But that's right up there with never have sex or touch another person as long as you live. It's not realistic and probably not good for you. So that's what, if you maybe have already started it and you're ahead of the curve, but people are starting to think about, what can I do that would be something I'd like to do, but isn't as risky as blank? And we all have different calculations for that. Some people feel like they can go hear music locally, but they wouldn't go to the Molson Center in Montreal. That feels too big. Some people sort of feel like, I think I'd be comfortable going to Florida if it was a direct flight, but I don't feel like I could go to Europe, because then what if I got COVID there and got stuck there? And so people are trying to figure it out. And so I want you to be figuring it out too, even though the world is kind of meh, because it's going to be important to understand, just like we did in the 80s, to understand sort of like, I have to learn to live with this and not think of it as my enemy, but know that it requires extra steps in decision making. Okay. Any questions in the chat, Christy? No.
In the chat, we just had Alicia Monroe had recently listened to a podcast, The Happiness Lab with Dr. Lori Santos, and she actually had a guest, Adam Grant. He's a psychologist, and he talked about languishing as well. So she had just put that in there as another opportunity for people to learn more about languishing.
Yeah, and there's a lot being written on it too. Again, because it's not anxiety and it's not depression, it's soul sucking, it kills our resilience, it eats away at our motivation. Like it is like a disease, like a secondary disease to, having a infection all over the world. So good. Yes. So yeah, do more reading about it if you'd like. But I wanted to, before we end, I want to talk about sort of in terms of self-care, because I do sort of feel like I am in the business of helping people take better care of themselves. So to tell you I have nothing to tell you probably is unrealistic. I probably have something to tell you. But I want you to think of self-care as almost kind of like a form of selfish. When our reserves are really low, as they have been, you have to really watch your bandwidth. You have to watch where you spend your energy and how you spend it and what's worth spending it on. So I want you to think about these 3 questions, maybe even write them down, because there's 3 ingredients to this. The first one is, am I meaningfully connected to why I am doing it? Whatever the it is. Am I meaningfully connected as to why I'm doing this? Second one is, am I connected to what I'm doing? And the third is, am I connected to who I'm doing it for? And we all do things that we don't feel meaningfully connected to. We don't really feel like doing it. We don't really want to do it for that person. And my neighbor says, can you come over and take out my air conditioners for the, winter? It's like, I don't really want to, but yes, I will. And so I'm saying that the things that end up contributing to better self-care are things that you can answer all 3 questions effectively. Am I meaningfully connected as to why I'm doing what I'm doing? Am I connected to what I'm doing? And am I connected to who I'm doing it for? And I'll give you an example. So on my path from my office to the YMCA here, I walk along Buell Street. And for a big chunk of 20 and 2021, I don't know where she's gone now, there was this woman who would just park on Buell Street, open up her hatchback of her vehicle, and it was full of food, and she would feed homeless people. So all the homeless people would move off of Church Street and move over to Buell Street for their lunch. And nice homemade food, and she had plates and silverware, so they weren't given kind of bags of food, and they could look and see what they wanted, and she didn't make them wear masks or anything. And she would just serve out of the back of the car, and then when everyone was fed or she ran out of food, she would leave. And so one day I said to her, do you work for some organization or something? Because I said, is this an outreach from the food shelf or from Spectrum Youth and Family Services? And she's like, no, I just came up with it myself. I live alone and I really like to cook. But it's not as much fun to cook for one, because you end up having a lot left over. And so like if I make a really good soup, I end up eating soup for 2 weeks. Whereas a good cook likes to cook every day and cook something different every day. But then what do you do with all the food? And so she said, I see these guys hanging out by the Congregational Church. And I just sort of thought like, well, I should just go feed them. And she said, and I really liked it. And they really liked it. And they would start saying things like, it's okay to put some spice in this. You don't have to make it so mild. And because she said I don't know what people's palates are, and so for me that was an example of, am I meaningfully connected to why I'm doing it? Yes, I love to cook, and I get to be helping other people and filling their bellies. Am I connected to what I am doing as someone who loves being in the kitchen and loves cooking? It's like I get up excited to sort of think about, like, people haven't been liking my meatloaf as much as they liked my shepherd's pie, even though it's kind of all the same ingredients. So I think I'll make the shepherd's pie today. And am I connected to who I'm doing it for? And so, I won't talk for you. I would think sort of like I freaking have energy and motivation to cook for people I don't even know. Like, I'm having a hard time just cooking for my partner and I. Actually, I don't even hardly ever do that. He does all the cooking. So that to me, I sort of thought like, I could get the why I'm doing it, and I could get the who I'm doing it, but I don't know if I could get the what I'm doing, because that would not be relaxing. So notice sometimes if you are doing something that on the surface looks like it would take more energy than you normally have, my guess is it might be ticking those 3 boxes. And that's probably the best form of self-care for languishing at this point in time. So I know we've only got a minute left. So I want you to remember your species. I want you to live and act like the human beings that you were designed to be. We're designed to be social. We're designed to spend time and energy with other people. It's a really good return on our investment to spend time with other people. For any of you people who have wells, if you pull water out of the ground, you know that the water table needs to stay relatively in a good place in order for you to get water for baths and dishes and cooking and all the other stuff. But none of us really love rainy days. But without rainy days, you don't get groundwater. So we need the rainy days to get some of the good stuff. And so the good stuff comes from our interactions with each other. Even if we feel like we have nothing to offer, that's just a muscle, that's a little flabby. Once you start working out again, it will all come back to you. Even if you're an introvert, you still need to be social. We were not meant to stay home for the rest of our lives, especially with our families. No more. All right. Any last minute questions? I know you probably all have to get off and go to other things that are infinitely important today. Just kidding.
You guys, if anyone, feel free to comment. I'm seeing the chat room.
And also, if any of you have any questions about anything I talked about and you wanted to ask me more of something, you can always get my email from Christy.
Yeah. Sure. Lots of thank yous coming in, Kevin, in the chat room. No questions, but that's good.
Well, that's probably, Christy, I'm so good at what I did. I covered so much territory that there were no questions even to be had.
You were wonderful, Kevin. And, your laughter and just looking at a subject that is sometimes so difficult to talk about and put into like a perspective using the humor that you did, it definitely made me chuckle and enjoy your presentation a lot. So I appreciate all of you today joining us over your lunchtime. Spread the word. Uploaded and people could watch it if they were not able to join us today at lunchtime. I will share Kevin's information, his contact information with those that were on the Zoom today so that people have that to reach out. But we're looking forward to hopefully having Kevin back in the future with us for different presentations along the way. Because your humor in these tough subjects is definitely refreshing. So I appreciate you and everyone today, and we'll talk to everyone soon.
I appreciate all of you coming. Thank you so much. You made my day.
Bye, everyone.